Well, good morning, students. Welcome back to school. I'm still on summer break, but I'm preparing you for what we're going to start this year off with, which is understanding what is literary nonfiction. Now, you have some fill in the blank notes that at the completion, after we've finished everything today, will be handed in for a daily grade. So make sure that you are following along with your what is literary nonfiction. So, the first thing I want to remind you, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is that nonfiction basically means it is fact. Nonfiction means it's not made up, it's not pretend, you're not exaggerating, you're simply giving the facts. So, please go ahead and fill out your first blank, which is nonfiction equals fact. Next, when writers tell stories of their own lives, that means I tell you all about me, not my mother, not my sister, not my cat, but about me. What I'm writing is an autobiography. So, biography is a life story, and auto means it's about me. So, make sure you filled out the second blank. Autobiographies equal writers tell stories of their own lives. Go ahead and fill that out now. So clearly, if an autobiography is a writer telling a story about their own life, then a biography is where I write about someone else's life. This time I can fill you in all about my cat, my friend Billy Bob, or my great granny. Whatever it is, you know that a biography is when writers tell the story of someone else's life. So now take a moment and fill out biography equals writers tell stories about someone else's life. Now, the next one's a little bit different. Journals and diaries are where people write about their own thoughts. Now, you might be asking, how is this any different from an autobiography? Let me explain. An autobiography, I'm basically writing about my own life to share with someone else, to explain what's happened, to give you the full details. A journal or a diary, however, is more about your private thoughts and feelings. You probably don't want to share the entire thing with an adoring fan, but for my journaling, I can write down all my ideas, all my thoughts, all my wonderings. With the diary, I can either address myself or Dear Diary, but again, it's more personal, less narrative, less telling a complete story, and more just what the thoughts and feelings are for the moment. So take a time right now to fill out journal, diary equals people write about their own thoughts. Now, I mentioned the word narrative. Narrative basically means you tell a story. So, a narrative is any time you are explaining something in a story format. You're remembering something, telling it from beginning to end. A narrative is simply telling a story. Now, because we have so many different types of things to read and write about, we categorize these things into genres. That means we group different types of readings and writings into similar characteristics. So, a genre is a category used to describe a text. Kind of like when you go to the supermarket and you're looking for different items on your list, you may not find the exact cereal you want the first time you look, but you know to go to the cereal aisle. Same with genres. I may not know exactly what I want to write, but I can tell if it is nonfiction, all facts, narrative, telling a story, autobiography, writing a story about myself, biography, writing a story about someone else's life, journal and diaries, basically filling my own thoughts out. All of these are genres, a category used to describe a text. So now that we've gone over these initial definitions, we need to explain what is literary nonfiction. So I've got two words here. You already know that nonfiction means fact. So we're not making it up. We're not creating a story. We're not adding spaceships. We're not adding talking animals. Literary just means that instead of the facts being something, let's say, scientific or something with numbers and statistics, literary basic means we're telling a story about facts. It can be a biography, it can be an autobiography, or it can be a news story, but we're presenting the factual information in story format, which also means we're using literary techniques such as figurative language or following a storyline or adding characters. So, literary nonfiction means it is real stories about real people and real places. Take a moment to fill that out now. So I mentioned that literary nonfiction, which is a genre, has its own characteristics. So they are definitely going to use different things to explain the information, telling the story factually. So one of the things you want to make sure you understand is that literary nonfiction characteristics use literary elements, such as, and when I say literary, I mean story. So, some of the things you're going to use characters. You're going to have people in your story. You're going to use setting. You're going to tell me the time, the place, where and when it happened. You're going to have a conflict. Most stories are only good because there's a problem that has to be solved. That's the conflict. You're going to have a theme. A good story has some kind of lesson learned. What did you figure out at the end? What was the main idea behind this? What's the point of the story? You're going to have a plot. A plot basically means that you are going to go ahead and have the story happen in an order that makes sense. I'm not going to tell you about what happened yesterday before I tell you what happened next week after I tell you what happened 6 years ago. I would just confuse you. So, plot basically follows the pattern of beginning to end. Because plot usually begins at the beginning and ends at the end, we call this sequential or chronological order. They mean the same thing. Sequential means one after the other. Chronological means time order. Start at the beginning, finish at the end. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have episodes that you flash back to an earlier time or dreams where you look ahead to the future. But for the most part, literary nonfiction follows sequential or chronological time order. Now, good writing makes it come alive. It allows me to see what you see, hear what you hear, touch what you touch, taste what you taste, and what's the last one? We're talking about sensory details. So, sensory details are all about sight, what do you see? Taste, what tastes are there if you're eating? Please don't taste the garbage though. Touch, what do things feel like? Smell, are there any special smells that remind you of what happened during the example of the story? And sound, what are you hearing around you? By using sensory details, you're not just telling me your story, you're making me live inside your head. And that makes it so much more real and factual because literary nonfiction tells a factual story. Finally, because we are talking about literary nonfiction, I mentioned that we're going to use literary elements, literary techniques, and that's basically what we call figurative language. That's where you can compare things with similes and metaphors. That's where you can add some onomatopoeia so that you can bring the sounds to life. So don't forget that even though it's factual, you can still add those figurative language examples where you bring a little bit of artistry to the factual account. And that's what makes literary nonfiction different than just a news story or a scientific essay. We're using figurative language to help bring it to life in your mind and sensory details to bring it to life in your understanding of what everything was like. So, when we talk about literary nonfiction, remember we're talking about factual events, but told in a way that paints a picture in your mind so that you can imagine exactly what was going on to the person that the story was happening to. So here you have your entire fill in the blank notes for what is literary nonfiction. You will be handing these in for a daily grade. Thanks for listening.